Welcome to the flip side, folks, and tonight's tale focuses on a cryptid known as the Waheela, aka the Saber Wolf. Some might call it the dire wolf. This is an entity described as a large carnivorous wolf-like creature found in Alaska and parts of the northwest of the Canadian territories. But as we will see, it can also be linked to additional and similar beasts found throughout North America. Hey there, how's it going? I'm your host Mark, and welcome to this latest offering here on the flip side. But before we get into it, I'd like to ask that if you are indeed a fan of the weird, wonderful and sometimes sinister stories of humanity, to please consider hitting that subscriptions button, because these are the kinds of stories that I cover here on this channel. Now, I'd also like to apologise for the lack of content last week. It's the first time in a long time that I've missed a weekly upload here on YouTube. As a working photographer and cameraman, I had a pressing engagement for a couple of clients that needed shooting and editing. Now, I don't know about you, but as a business holder, this whole corona issue has knocked the business for six, so it's nice to see that recovering, even if it's in a small way. But anyways, back on track. As is customary, I'd like to take this moment to shout out to some of the channel's subscribers as a way of saying thanks for going that extra mile and interacting with me via comments to recent uploads. So a big thanks goes out to, and I hope I get these right, Canada's Rifle, Doncha O'Hanlon, Percy White and JW Wonderland. Ladies and gents, thanks for your comments. Please do keep them coming. They're always very much appreciated and warmly welcomed. And so, without further ado, this is the tale of the Waheela or Saber Wolf here on the Tales from the Flip Side. Known as the Waheela or Saber Wolf, there is a cryptid whose wolf-like appearance and body is reported as being extremely muscular and heavily built. It is said to have a wider head than a common normal wolf, overtly large feet with wide spaced out toes. It also has long legs and short hind legs. Its fur is described as being pure white, similar to that of a polar bear or an Arctic fox. But what's more shocking is its size. Eyewitness records estimate the entity being encountered as standing between 3.5 to 4 feet tall at its shoulder. Witnesses also claim to see only one of these entities at a time, leading the cryptozoology world to believe that these animals are indeed solitary creatures, only coming together to mate. Now, there are those who suggest the Waheela to be what is called an amphicyanid, something commonly referred to as a bear dog, a large extinct terrestrial carnivore that inhabited North America during the Middle Eocene to the early Pleistocene eras. Other theories state that it may be a remaining dire wolf, a prehistoric North American hyena, or an entity that could be completely new to science. Now, on May 16, 2018, a rancher in Montana shot and killed a strange wolf-like creature on his property. According to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officials, the animal came within several hundred yards of this rancher's livestock, and fearing for the well-being of his stock, the rancher shot the predator and reported the incident as is required by law. The animal was a young, non-lactating female and was a canid. That is, a member of the dog family, which includes dogs, foxes, coyotes and wolves. Now, an official report of the incident included the following passage. The animal originally was reported as a wolf, but several fish, wildlife and parks wolf specialists looked at photos of the animal and collectively doubted it was a purebred wolf. The canine teeth were too short, the front paws too small, and the claws on the front paw were way too long. The animal was so strange looking that FWP officials submitted some of the tissues for DNA analysis, and the results of these tests are still forthcoming. For many cryptozoology enthusiasts, this strange Montana canine invokes suggestions of what is known as the Shunka Waraq, a monster of indigenous Iowa Indian mythology. Now, the Iowa Indians are a Sioux people whose ancestral homelands included the Great Plains of southern Wisconsin and eastern Iowa. According to the old Iowa legend, a ferocious hyena-like animal once roamed the American prairies. Due to its habit of killing and devouring dogs, the Iowa called this creature the Shunka Waraq, which translates as carrying off dogs. Every night, this creature snuck into Iowa camps, and every morning, a few more dogs were found to be missing. When the Iowa figured that these visitations had gone on long enough, they decided to ambush in the hope of killing this animal. Now, armed with muskets and bows and arrows, they crouched in the darkness beside their teepee, not far from where their dogs were tethered. And as night fell and the stars traversed the moonless skies, a strange wolf-like creature slinked into camp from the darkness. The Iowa had never seen anything like it before. The baffled braves sprang from their hiding places and peppered the animals with arrows and musket balls. Now, incredibly, the missiles failed to bring the creature down, and in fact, they only seemed to make it angrier. With a blood-curdling shriek, the animal lunged at its tormentors. The warriors managed to drive it back with their spears and clubs, and after a tremendous struggle, the animal retreated back into the wilderness. The Iowa decided to follow it. Now, the Iowa braves tracked the creature through the night and most of the following day. Eventually, they succeeded in cornering it. The creature put up a savage last stand and fought to the bitter end. And when it finally fell under the Iowa's guns, it was said to have cried, just like a human being. Now, once the warriors had vanquished their foe, the braves skinned its carcass. They painted its hide and placed it in a medicine bundle. Now, the Iowa believed that whoever wore this medicine bundle into battle would be immune from the enemy's bullets and arrows, much like the indomitable monster whose skin it contained. Now, in 1991, a graduate student of Iowa State University named Lance Foster rediscovered the legend of the Shunka Waraq. The legend reminded Foster of a mysteriously stuffed canine which was once on display at a small museum in Henry Lake, Idaho. Foster knew that the museum had closed down quite some time ago and that the stuffed animal was missing. He suspected that the long-lost curio might be a Shunka Waraq specimen, a relative of the vicious dog-eating monster of Iowa lore. Now, Foster related his theory to Loren Coleman, a prominent American cryptozoologist at the time, and using that information that Foster gave him, Coleman unearthed the fascinating backstory behind the stuffed animal at Henry Lake, and he included this story in his 1999 book, Cryptozoology A to Z. Now, according to this story, a family by the name of Hutchins travelled by stagecoach to Montana's Madison River Valley sometime in the 1880s. Once there, the family's patriarch, Israel Amon Hutchins, set about establishing a ranch. And no sooner was it finished and that the family settled into their new routine, their lives were turned upside down by the arrival of a strange and unwanted visitor. Israel's grandson, zoologist Dr. Ross Hutchins, described the incident in his 1977 book by the name of Trails to Nature's Mysteries, The Life of a Working Naturalist. According to Dr. Ross, Israel heard his dogs barking one winter morning and headed over to investigate. And once he got there, he discovered a dark wolf-like beast that was chasing his wife's geese. He shot at the animal to scare it off with his rifle, but he actually missed, and after having been shot at, the beast ran down to the river and disappeared into the brush. Now, several days later, members of the Hutchins family spied the mysterious animal at dawn. They saw it several more times around the ranch, and their neighbours had also said they'd seen the creature around their own ranch located about 15 miles downriver. Now, those who saw the animal described it as being almost black in appearance, with high shoulders and a back that sloped downwards like a hyena. At night, the animal made haunting vocalizations, which almost sounded like a human scream. Now, one morning in late January, Israel Hutchins, alerted by the barking of his dogs, saw the creature and shot it dead. Just what the animal was remains a mystery to this day, wrote Dr. Ross. After its death, the Hutchins family donated the creature's body to a man named Sherwood. And Sherwood duly stuffed the animal and kept it in his aforementioned museum at Henry Lake. And he eventually dubbed the animal, or the beast, as a ringdocus. And in November 2007, another grandson of Israel Hutchins named Jack Kirby rediscovered the stuffed ringdocus in the Idaho Museum of Natural History. Sure enough, the animal is a strange wolf-like creature with a dark coat and narrow snout, and it has a back that slopes downwards, very much like a hyena. Kirby repossessed the mount in his grandfather's name before donating it to the Madison Valley History Museum in Montana, where it remains to this day. Kirby neglected to submit its hair for DNA analysis, preferring that the mystery of its identity live on. And to date, no such DNA analysis has been conducted on that mount. Now, recent events suggest that a ringdocus might not be an isolated phenomenon, and according to cryptozoologist Mark A. Hall, the 1990s saw numerous reports of a mean-looking near wolf-like and hyena cross, as it were, in Alberta, Canada, as well as in the states of Nebraska, Iowa, and Illinois. Then in 2005 and 2006, a mysterious wild animal invaded farmers' properties all over Montana, killing a total of 120 sheep and seriously mauling many others. On November the 2nd, 2006, a 106-pound culprit was shot in Garfield County, Montana by state wildlife service agents. The creature's fur had a strange hue that ranged from red to orange to yellow and appeared to be something other than a grey wolf, which was the only animal it even bore a remote resemblance. Now, despite postulations that the animal was in fact a Shunka Waraq in, the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department identified it as a 4-year-old male wolf with abnormally long and red fur. Now, will this new mystery canine shot on the ranch in Montana similarly prove to be a wolf? Or will the DNA analysis confirm it as an entirely new species or a relic of Montana's prehistoric past? As yet, nobody knows. In his aforementioned book, cryptozoologist Loren Coleman theorized that the ringdocus, and by extension the Shunka Waraq might be a relic of what is called the Borophagus, an ancient bone-crushing hyena-like dog known to have lived in North America during the Pleistocene epoch. Alternatively, cryptozoologist Jerome Clark put forth the notion that the animal might be a surviving Hyenodon montanus, a species of carnivorous mammal believed to have gone extinct during the Oligocene epoch. Now, many cryptozoologists have attempted to draw a connection between the ringdocus, the Shunka Waraq, and an even more mysterious creature from northern Canada, the cryptid known today as the Waheela. The Wahila is said to hail from the watershed of the South Nahanni River in Canada's Northwest Territories. It is a rugged national park and a mecca for extreme outdoor adventurers. Now, the Nahanni Valley, as it is sometimes called, is a place of myth and mystery. It is home to legends of lost gold mines, mysterious decapitations, forgotten tribes, and prehistoric monsters. This area has also been the subject of one of our stories here on the flip side, so please check out this video for more about the strange events surrounding numerous disappearances of gold miners and adventurers in the Nahanni National Park, many of whom were subsequently found decapitated. Now, the word Waheela is not a local Indian word, nor does it have subarctic origins. In fact, it was first introduced to the world by Ivan T. Sanderson, an eccentric zoologist, adventurer and pioneer in the field of Fortean, the subject of unexplained phenomena. In fact, Sanderson is considered by some to be one of the founding fathers of cryptozoology. In October of 1974, a year after Sanderson's death, one of Sanderson's unpublished articles entitled The Direwolf appeared in a magazine named Pursuit. Now, this article described a giant white wolf which lived in the Nahanni Valley. Sanderson called this creature the Waheela, after a mysterious wolf-like monster said to haunt the forests of northern Michigan. Sanderson's article, coupled with some of his private correspondence, described how he, and by extension much of the Western world, first came to learn of this mysterious white wolf of the North Country. Back in the mid-1960s, Sanderson was approached by a young mechanic from Philadelphia, a man by the name of Frank Graves. Now, Graves had read Sanderson's book, Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, one of the first works that explored the Sasquatch and Yeti phenomenon. Graves had then decided to make a trip to the Nahanni Valley in order to investigate a hunch that Sasquatch-like creatures lived in the region. He approached Sanderson in order to ask the seasoned adventurer for advice which might aid him in his expedition. Now Sanderson hooked Graves up with 4 men who had also approached him for advice and who also hoped to explore the Nahanni Valley. These men were members of the so-called American Expeditionary Society, or AES for short. They were an academic club comprised of about 30 American university students who hoped to resurrect the dying art of old-fashioned exploratory expeditions. That summer, Frank Graves and his 4 AES companions flew to Fort Simpson in the Northwest Territories, where they then purchased a flat-bottomed scow with a motor and made their way down the Laird River and up the South Nahanni River. The 5 companions established a base camp deep in the Nahanni Valley, at the base of an enormous waterfall called Virginia Falls. From there, Graves made several expeditions above the falls on foot. At all times, he was accompanied by an Indian guide, and it was during one such excursion that Graves' Indian companion brought along a dog, and he hoped that his canine companion might be able to flush out any game that they came across. Now the trio worked their way up a glen which led from the river. Eventually they came to a small plateau covered in grass and brush, and sure enough, Graves' native companion spotted some wildfowl in the lumber below, and with his dog by his side he ambled down the slope towards them, hoping to bag something for dinner. Frank Graves opted to stay up on the plateau in case any game appeared in his partner's absence. He was armed with a double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun and would be able to take on any game that came his way. Suddenly there was a rustle in the bushes not far from where Graves was standing. Thinking that the hunter's dog might be approaching, he didn't raise his gun, something that he soon regretted, when an enormous snow-white animal ambled out of the bush. Now at first, Graves took this animal to be a polar bear, and when he looked a little closer, however, he saw that it looked more like a gigantic dog. It stood up on long legs, more like a dog or a wolf. It had a wide, flat head and rather short ears. Now Graves panicked and fired both barrels of his shotgun at the creature, and the animal hardly seemed to notice. In fact, it slowly turned around and wandered back into the forest. Now with shaking fingers, Graves slipped another shell into his weapon and fired at the creature's rear, and amazingly, the animal maintained its leisurely pace as if nothing had happened, and it soon ambled off into the forest. Now Graves' Indian companion quickly returned, thinking that Graves had killed some game. When the white man related his terrifying experience to his companion, the native insisted that they return to their boat and leave the area at once. And only when they reached the safety of their base camp downriver did the native explain that the animal Graves encountered was not an extremely large wolf, but rather another animal entirely. These were solitary creatures, not pack animals like grey wolves. They were much larger than wolves, had splayed feet and thick, heavy tails. These beasts, the Indians said, were quite rare. Most of them lived further to the north, and some of them made annual trips into the Mackenzie Mountains, of which the Nahanni Valley is a part. And a few stayed in Nahanni Valley all year round. Now interestingly, Frank Graves and his Indian companion were not the only men to speak of this giant white wolf-like creature of the Northland. Now, in a letter to Ivan Sanderson, a man whose signature the author couldn't figure out just to be so indecipherable, this man claimed that in October of 1970, while visiting the town of Moosonee in northern Ontario, that he had overheard the story of this creature from the lips of a Dene Indian who claimed to come from Nahanni country. The Dene were terrified of these monsters, the man's Indian informant claimed. They said that they were impossible to kill. The animal looked a little like a husky Alsatian crossbreed, but was many times larger. Its rear was more akin to that of a Saint Bernard. It had an 11-foot long body and a 4-foot long tail. The rear portion of the body apparently slopes away in the same manner of that of a bear, the writer wrote. The head appears to be low-slung and flattened and having a broad muzzle. To round it out, the colour of its coat ranged from a tan brown to pure white. Now its habits are disgusting, if it exists, the letter writer continued. Part carrion eater, it can take apart a bear, but prefers young or injured animals, and it delights to snatch the young from the mother while she is in the process of giving birth. and it is also said to attack humans on sight. Now, other descriptions of the great white wolf of the North Country are eerily consistent with that of the letter writer's Indian informant. For example, in his book, The Dire Wolf, Ivan Sanderson mentions that an old friend of his, a professional cameraman turned film director named Tex Ziegler, made a few points about what he called the Great White Wolf of Alaska back in the 1950s, long before Frank Graves's encounter. Now, before he became involved in the film industry, Ziegler worked as a prospector and then subsequently as a trader. He finally became a pilot in the Alaskan wilderness, and he earned himself the epithet the Flying Trader. It was during his days in the isolated northern country that he personally came across the gigantic solitary white wolf on a number of occasions. Similarly, in a letter to the editor published in Volume 2, Number 1 of the online Fortean magazine, named North American Biofortean Review in 2000, that a man who identified himself as Paul W. and who worked in the outdoors industry described an enormous white wolf which his good friend had encountered in the wilderness of northern Ontario, not far from his hunting lodge. Now, he estimated that this animal, which was feasting on a moose carcass at the time, weighed in at least 200 pounds. It had a large broad head and its front legs were longer than its rear legs. It didn't look much like a wolf and was larger and more robust than even a big alpha male wolf should be. Its tracks were a whopping 8 inches wide. Now, some of those who have commented on the Wahila over the years have speculated that it is simply an unusually large wolf, perhaps a genetic freak shunned by its pack due to its size. Others suggest that the lone white wolf of the Northland may actually be some form of white bear, perhaps even a spirit or commode bear, or even in fact a starving albino black bear. Perhaps the most intriguing theory regarding the nature of the Wahila, first put forth by Ivan Sanderson in his book The Dire Wolf, contends that the great white warden wolf is an amphiason, an ancient bone-crushing canid commonly known as a bear dog. Now, these animals were neither dogs nor bears, but some of them were indeed the size of the largest living bears, and others, not all, had dog-like features. Today, it is believed that these creatures died out at the end of the Miocene epoch, the geological era preceding the Pliocene era, and it is possible that relic populations of these creatures may still exist in remote corners of the continent in places like the Nahanni Valley. Of course, another theory contends that the Wahila is the same species as the Shunka Waraq Inn, the mysterious canine of Montana and the American Midwest, despite the fact that the ringdocus specimen, at least, is much smaller than the great white wolf reported in the subarctic. And they both have completely different physiologies. Both animals are mysterious canids that appear to be very difficult to kill. They both also share the ability to be able to crush bones. And let's hope that one day someone will at least start to conduct DNA tests on the few available stuffed specimens of ringdocus, at least as a start to try and find out what these unknown entities could be. Well, there you have it, folks. That's all we've got time for this week's instalment. If you have indeed liked this video, please be sure to leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Please also hit that notifications bell so that you'll get a heads up as and when the next instalment is ready for your viewing pleasure. And please don't forget too that if you have a subject or story that you'd like me to research for possible inclusion in the channel, to please submit those ideas in the comments below. Other than that, all that remains is for me to wish you all the best. Please do stay safe, stay sane, but above all stay healthy, and hopefully we'll meet again sometime soon here on the flip side.